All right, folks, it looks like we are live on Periscope, Facebook, and let me double check here, YouTube. Folks who are joining us live already, thank you for joining in. Replay viewers, it's really good to have you with us. Looks like somebody's showing up on Periscope. Somebody's showing up on YouTube. Welcome. Feel free to leave comments. I will know that you're with me and who you are if you leave a comment. Facebook's a little slow this morning, but it's happening. All right, so today, folks, I am doing a live video with a podcast in it. The podcast, of course, is Entrepreneur Live Video. It is my daily podcast. You can find it on iTunes, Google Play. You can get it on the Amazon Alexa. I mean, it's everywhere. And it drops 6 times a week where it's just me for 5 to 15 minutes talking live video. And 1 time per week on Wednesdays where I interview somebody who is crushing it or doing unique things with live video. Today, of course, my guest is Greg Gates Jr. Greg and I have been have done podcasts and live videos quite a bit over the last couple of years. We've become buddies on both Snapchat and Instagram and Facebook. I mean, we've kind of done it all. The last time Greg was on, we talked about Instagram. Today, of course, we are talking about live video. And I'm going to start the podcast here in just a minute and bring Greg in. So let's just start it now, as a matter of fact. So 3, 2, 1. Hey, folks, this is Todd at Todd.LIVE. Today's Entrepreneur Live Video is an interview with my good friend Greg Gates Jr. And let me play some music and we will bring him right in.
You are listening to Entrepreneur Live Video with Todd.LIVE, broadcasting from sunny Southern California. This is the place where the most talented online live video personalities and marketers share what works for them as live video becomes the most effective megaphone to the world man has ever known. Without further ado, here is your host, Todd.LIVE.
All right, folks. Yes, Greg Gates Jr. He is connecting with me today via Skype through his phone. He's in a really cool park he's up in Northern California, and they're already starting to get the rain. If you've been paying attention to the news anywhere in this country, you know Southern California is about to get, California in general is about to get walloped. I think he's already starting to see it. He's got redwoods behind him, and he's got a really interesting scene going. So I'm really excited to have him on as far as the background goes. But I'm also excited to have him on because of the content he produces. Greg has been teaching financial literacy in bite-sized micro content now for probably over 2 years. Maybe we're pushing 2 years, right around that time frame. He and I connected on Snapchat a couple of years ago. He's been doing Snapchat. He's been doing a lot of Instagram stories, Instagram Live. He has a show called The Daily Dish where he's washing dishes and talking about financial literacy. And you know what? He's somebody who understands that this is a topic that a lot of times with people meets resistance. It's sometimes uncomfortable. And there's really not ever been a lot of fun ways to discuss finances. And Greg brings his own fun way of talking about it so that each day, if you tune in to Greg, you are learning a little bit more about how to stay solvent, how to keep your head above water, smart tips, tricks, and tactics in spending money, saving money, thinking about money, planning your money journey. It's just one of those things that kids aren't taught about. No one's really taught about. You just jump in when you get out of high school and have to figure it out on your own. And Greg understands that. And so he makes it a lot of fun. Greg, you are on camera, my friend. How are you doing?
Great. Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Todd. I really appreciate it. I'm doing great today. Thanks for having me.
Well, what would you like to add for the folks as far as what an introduction could include about Greg? And of course, your channel is on Snapchat and Instagram, Greg Chats Cash. All one big 3 words that make up one. Greg Chats Cash. And that's where you can find him. So Greg, what else would you add to the intro for the folks to get to know you a little better?
Oh, well, I like to think of myself as someone who gets into social media because I'm trying to promote social change. I see the lack of general financial education that's available to us as something that I am just really bothered by. And so I seek to figure out ways to help people out. So I go at it from an angle of how can I be supportive in people's learning process? No blame, no shame. None of us learn this stuff. So why should we know it already? And so that's the approach I'm coming from. And like you said, I'm a layperson who has taken a deep dive into it. So I come at it from knowing that, it's okay not to be an expert.
It is okay to not be an expert pretty much in anything you're doing, but financial literacy is tough. I mean, as we're growing up, I mean, what's your opinion is where's the first place we learn it? Of course, my opinion, I kind of already stated it. I think that we're kind of thrown into the fire right when we come out of high school. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think a large part of where our financial histories come from is our financial relationships within our families, where you're going to find that how you were raised and those around you dealt with money while you were growing up is really going to affect how you view it and possibly utilize it, and how willing you are to come to conversations around it, because that's part of it. A lot of people who end up watching some of the silly stuff I do, like you said, the Daily Dish, which I tried to do daily. It hasn't been daily yet, but we're getting there. And when we're doing the Daily Dish, a lot of people come on and join me and want to talk about this stuff. But it's important to recognize that when you turn that off, or you learn on your own, that, you have to bring your family to that conversation too. And that's important to really think about, is like when we're developing our financial history, we're learning it from our parents and our siblings and our guardians and maybe even our grandparents. And then we're getting into relationships and we have to deal with other people who bring their own financial history. So a lot of it is unstructured learning. It's not necessarily in some like classroom or on the job even, because basically I remember getting some of my first jobs being handed the W-4 and being like, what is this? The little form you got to fill out for your taxes when you first start a new job. Everyone's like, what do I put down here? I would say a vast majority of folks pretty much have that same question when they're handed that form.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why it's like you just kind of get thrown into the fire. A lot of people, I mean, one, they don't teach financial literacy anywhere that I am aware of in grade school, junior high, high school. There's just not much of it. Maybe there's a little bit coming in with some schools around the country that are trying it out, but I haven't heard much about that. But
well, there's different state by state mandates is really how it breaks down.
Okay. Yeah. And so, I mean, like, you learn a lot about math, you learn a lot about science and history and all that, but there's not a lot of education on, and in fact, I think home ec would be a great course for, or this would be a great addition to home ec. In home ec, you learn sewing, you learn baking cookies, you learn, how to maintain a kitchen, you learn like household things. Well, another household thing is managing the financial ship of the house, making sure that it's afloat.
When there was a lot of cutbacks and restructuring of education over the last few decades, home economics was a class that a lot of this financial education was located in, especially years ago. And, a lot of that, because of funding, because of restructuring of education, pushed that out. And that is kind of one of those unforeseen consequences. And what's interesting is a lot of times you'll find financial education in some math classes still, but it tends to be in academic tracks that are, when they have a tracking system, not necessarily college prep track classes may cover things like financial education a little bit, but a lot of times in those classes, you're also dealing with a lot of behavior management. So you're not necessarily getting a lot of financial education that's really driven home. I guess one of the things that I got excited about, and like one of the reasons we're doing this, is live streaming, social media, internet, whatever way that I can reach out through this really cool little phone here and reach out to as many people as possible and pass on a positive message of ways to be responsible with finance, with your money, with earning more, with saving, with investing, with any of these topics around money, having that conversation, making a safe space for people to talk about it, because what it boils down to is the systems I'm not going to be able to change.
Right.
Like having worked in education my whole life, I'm an alternative educator. Every time I've tried to work within the traditional systems, it's been very hard for me. So I figured out what I can't do within, I go around. And so I'm trying to create my own space. And a lot of times this live streaming thing is really handy for that, because I can, answer questions in the moment, ramble on and be honest too, because you can't fake it when you're live streaming for too long anyway.
Right. Well, one thing too, I think that you mentioned a couple times that you're a layperson. And I have a couple questions about that, and feel free to, explain and talk about, because I'm going to kind of throw you a few at one time.
Sure.
One, I think it's very interesting that a layperson takes on the topic of something that they're not trained in, like financial education. I mean, you know, you're an educator, but it's not been, I mean, your focus hasn't been on teaching people finances. It's you don't have the MBA and you don't have, you know, all these backgrounds, which I think is key to your success. I think that when you're a layperson, a lot of the times when you talk about something that you're not trained in, it goes a long way with the people because they can relate to you easier than they can the guy with all the degrees on the wall. Who's on CNN and all that. They would rather hear from somebody who's just like an everyday guy who's really passionate about a subject. So I think that's really cool. And I'd love to know your thoughts on that. But you know, what kind of nudged you into doing it? What, you know, 2-3 years ago, what really got you, you know, is like, this is what I'm going to do. I mean, this is really what I want to do. So if you can kind of hit on both of those points, that'd be awesome.
Well, you know, it's as far as being the layperson, my background as someone who has been a lifelong learner, I have loved deep diving into topics, into subjects, and had some incidences in my own life, which I'll get to, that brought me into learning a lot about personal finance. And then I got really excited to learn about micro and macroeconomics. I did a lot of self-learning, all self-taught in the form of mostly podcasts. I did a lot of listening to Yale series lectures. Robert Schiller's financial markets class is available on podcast form. It's great. It's an entire lecture series that actually he did during the financial recession, the Great Recession, as it was going on. So it was very fascinating to listen to. He had tons of guest speakers in that. I would deep dive into different books and podcasts and audiobooks, and got into it for years. And that's what some of that stemmed from personal interest and need. And then some of that, when it came to 2 years ago, I came across my cousin. She introduced me to Snapchat. I came across Snapchat and saw, one, the immediacy of it, the 24-hour turnaround, it disappearing. I loved that. I was like, I can make silly stuff on this and not stress too much because it's gone in 24 hours. I loved that idea, which is what I like about live streaming too, is it's up for 24 hours and it's gone. There's a lot of repurposing now, and I'm starting to get into that as I feel more confident keeping my content up. But what it came down to is 2 years ago, I saw Snapchat and I was like, I can make silly stuff on this. I can draw right on the screen. I could be mobile, which I know Todd loves.
Right.
But here's the thing is, like, I love the handheld device, and I think being able to create on this and not on a laptop, I saw the opportunity there. And I saw Snapchat and I knew the kids were already there. So I saw the audience, I saw the platform that I could build on, and then I've built out from there for the last couple of years, deciding not to go singular platform. And in fact, I'm really debating whether to quit Snapchat right now, or at least very extremely abbreviate how I use it. But that's another long story. To get into why I'm doing this, beyond getting frustrated that I was never taught financial education, the big thing for me, one of the catalysts, there was many moments along the way that I made financial mistakes. Like, for example, when I was in my 20s, I cashed out a really great retirement fund that the YMCA had been matching for me for years. And so I was like, hey, I need that cash. I'm no longer working at this job. Cashed it out, took a huge penalty on that, and learned my lesson the hard way. So it's little things like that that along the way started my interest in learning more and learning through the School of Hard Knocks. And so passing that on feels important. And in 2012, Memorial Day weekend, I was riding a bike home from my job at the time. I was working at a local grocery store. And as I was riding home, safely, side of the road, helmet on, lights on, a truck ran a stop sign, took a left so hard that they were in the bike lane, hit me head on. Turned out to be a hit and run. I remember very little of it. Luckily, somehow didn't break any bones, but definitely had severe concussions, had a lot of injuries. At the time, it was before mandated health insurance. At the time, I was young and invincible. I had no insurance. And because it was a hit and run, it fell all on me. I was really fortunate because I had the community outpouring of support was amazing. Like my job gave me paid time off when it was an hourly market job. Like they didn't need to do that. They put up collection jars. The local community was really supportive. They never found the guy, but I didn't spend any more energy than I needed to on that because that was just frustrating. After all of that, I moved to my current location in Northern California. At the time, I was in Southern California. And now up in here, all of a sudden, I thought all the bills were settled, and I got a collections call because sometimes in medical emergencies, when you go to an emergency room and you get all the x-rays, doctor visits, there's multiple billing going on in one medical establishment. And because I moved, the one billing didn't find me. So I got to learn a little bit about collections and how to reverse that. And so all of a sudden I started having these financial hurdles on hurdles on hurdles. And I was like, okay, I need to get in front of this and I need to teach others how to do it. And eventually I came on Snapchat. So for a while there, I was thinking maybe I'll just put up little tags in coffee shops and say, come hang out and talk to me. So
you could still do that.
Oh, I am actually. And in fact, that's one of the things that there's a couple folks that I've run into that's a great idea. For those of you looking to share any education on or offline, here's a quick tip. If you have a subject that you're passionate about going to, there's a fella that I'm following. He goes by Oxford and Brogues. He is a financial advisor and gives financial workshops. What he does is he goes to different coffee shops and then does Instagram posts of whatever he's working on for the day there. Maybe takes a picture of his drink, but he also gets to know the coffee shops and then offers to offer up workshops during their after hours because most of them close around midday. So then he can offer a workshop in the afternoon, and then he runs workshops out of coffee shops. And all he has to do is put up his little flyer. He splits it in some way and makes some deal with the coffee shop for anyone that signs up, this kind of thing. So if you have a subject that you're passionate about teaching, starting these meetups in a coffee shop is a quick way to do that. And, you know, we end up working in coffee shops a lot, so why not?
Absolutely.
Combine those.
So let's, and I think it's brilliant. And I think that, I mean, I've got ideas for you. I have a friend of mine that meets people he paints rocks. And he sets them places. And so on the underside of the rock, when you turn it over, is the information about how to contact if you're interested in talking about whatever he's talking about. And the rock is painted. It's got, it's like some care is taken to it. And, and I don't know, maybe people leave it if they're not interested. I don't know, but he does the rock thing and it becomes this thing. I want to kind of pivot into live video and what this has done for you. You've already kind of touched on it a little bit, but and just the specifics of the different platforms. Now, you and I connected originally on Snapchat, and we've both really loved Snapchat. And you mentioned a minute ago that you've been debating leaving it. Do you care to share any more on your thoughts on why and what's going on in your head regarding Snapchat?
Here's the part where I am being very slow to fully flesh out a plan of action and an opinion because I recognize that it's nuanced and I don't want to appear hypocritical because every single social media platform has issues, especially at the human level of those who run it and some of the choices that they make. Like some of the latest stuff that's going on with any of the social media platforms, you can look at and say that is, possibly not healthy for us, that's unsafe, that's criminal. Whatever. Lately, the one thing that really was a catalyst this last few days was Snapchat's permission and promotion of a game that was promoting domestic violence and abuse. And it was a joke about slapping Rihanna or punching Chris Brown. And for something like that to get past a review stage is just flat out ridiculous to me. And that, I say, is something the catalyst in the way I've been thinking about using Snapchat, because the other thing that's always really bothered me is it's a platform that tends towards such a younger crowd that when you go over into the Discover section, the consistent objectification of women in there is really been bothersome to me. Now, with that said, I totally get that on social media platforms, there is objectification. There is plenty of posts that I would take offense to. But the thing about the Snapchat discovery area is you don't really have a choice. So my Instagram feed doesn't show me a lot of objectified women in bikinis and things like that because my feed doesn't feed me that because of the algorithm. In Snapchat, when I swipe over, like that's what kids see every day. And that's the part that kind of bothers me. You know, it's like every time a 12-year-old swipes over, or a 10-year-old or a 5-year, you know, like kids at 8 have Snapchat now. They swipe over, they see someone scantily clad and usually objectified. And with all that said, like I am not someone who is prude by any means. But my point being is that it just I've always had a little bit of an issue with that, and this whole permissive of our review process didn't catch this like blatant, disgusting, kind of a jab at domestic violence being okay, normalizing abuse. That part was really made me take pause. For example, I don't know if you've heard of String Story.
Yes.
She actually on this, she's the one that brought it to my attention. She actually decided to quit Snapchat altogether the other day. So
That's
she's
huge.
done. Yeah. So, and the part of my pause is that there is a bunch of folks that I have connected with here, and my goal has always been to go where people are, right? So that's the debate that I'm still dealing with. And one of the ideas I keep thinking of is Sean Doris uses Snapchat pretty much as a platform for advertising his YouTube videos.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the avenue to go, right? Just use it for my benefit to push people in other directions. I'm not sure.
Well, you have an audience there, and the thing you mentioned something earlier today, and this is where you're kind of in a bind on deciding this, and I can get it, is that your message, a lot of you see your message as something for the younger people.
Sure.
Helping them out because a lot of them aren't getting it at home. They're not getting it in school. And, you've got high school and college age kids using Snapchat more than anything else. And you see that as who you're speaking to and what other platform is going to give you that. And so it puts you in a real conundrum when you've got your moral considerations. And I'm sure there's some functional considerations as far as some changes they've made in the app. But it's not always, we're not always fond of the change. And
the functionality of the app has made it much easier to consider quitting too.
Yeah,
I am on a weekly spending hours just pulling my old stories from memories so that I can have them out of that app because I'm just like I'm ready to be done with it anyway. So I don't, and that's the part where I don't want to come across hypocritical and just say it was just this one thing that made me decide to do this, and I'm not sure if I'm going to do an all or nothing. I haven't quite decided yet.
Well, pushing your YouTube's a good idea, and still, it's going to take you. I mean, I don't know how big your audience is on Snapchat, but it isn't going to happen overnight where everybody just leaves Snapchat and follows you on Instagram. It's one of those things where it's a constant reminder. Hey, I'm doing more content on Instagram. I'm doing more content on Instagram. If you want to, or maybe I'm starting the story here, or this is a teaser for my story, but you can see the whole story on Instagram. And that isn't going to happen overnight. It's going to take months and months and months, maybe even, to get it.
You and I know it when it comes to pushing people in directions of usernames. Like going to Greg Chat's Cache has been a very steep learning curve. And it's funny because when I go back to my old username and I'll post a story trying to push people towards Greg Chat's Cache, I will actually get, hundreds on Snap. Like 300 or 400 are still watching the story there. And I'm like, oh, please come over to the other one. But also there's a lot of tap throughs. That's part of it too. I understand that there's just a whole bunch of people who aren't watching it. They're just tapping through all the stories.
Right. So you're doing a lot on Instagram Live. Explain how that's been going and how that's different than using Snapchat for you and your message.
I think it's been going well for what I've been doing with it. My consistency, everyone talks about being consistent, and that is something that I've not been. Other than the theme of it, I do what's called the Daily Dish, talking about money stuff until my dishes are done. And it's been a fun little setup. I just set up my camera, hit the Instagram Live, pin a subtitle, which I usually put in notes beforehand. So if any of you live streamers, definitely do the notes thing. Take a look at your screens, and also if you have here's a quick tip on that. If you're going to do a live stream on Instagram and post any type of title, think about what that title is going to appear like on the smallest of cameras. You would prefer to have a title that's going to fit so that you don't have to click more to read more of that comment. I like to throw an emoji in there. My titles tend to be long because I do use one of the larger iPhones, so I'm always tricked as to how much space I actually have. An emoji or two, just that makes it eye-catching. And then what I do is I hit live, and from there, once I'm live, I make sure that I start talking to the screen right away, because the people who are watching it later are watching right then. This is a tip I learned from you, Todd, I believe, back then. Yeah. Because I love that idea. It's like, okay, if you're catching this later, I really appreciate it. The fact that someone's going to watch my live stream later, like, wow, that's an honor. Once I go live, I pick a topic, and as I'm doing the dishes, as people come in, I try to engage them to ask me anything in lines with that topic, or really anything. What's really worked well for me with Instagram so far is something that you've keyed in on a couple of your videos, talking to people about live streaming together. Now, the tricky part is that you have to be careful when you're doing live streaming or posting Insta stories. Beware of using too much location tags and hashtags. People will think you're spam. I'm dealing with an issue right now where my Instagram account is actually really throttled, which I'm excited to to really push a campaign to get it unthrottled, because they're not listening to me one-on-one. So I'm going to actually reach out to a bunch of you folks too. If you'd help me, I'd really appreciate it. But Todd as well. Basically just some retweet type stuff.
Sure.
Basically because when you spend too much time using hashtags or location stickers over and over again, they will block those from you, and sometimes block your promotion of your channel. So right now, they're not telling all of my followers that I'm going live, but the ones that they are telling, a lot of them are showing up, and there's a lot of retention, which is what I'm really excited about. For me, think about this with live stream. It's not about numbers, it's about retention. So if there is one person who gets excited every time you get on, every time you get off, make sure you're messaging that person.
Good tip.
Thanking them, asking them how else you can help them. Super important. And if anyone live streams in with you, make sure you go and send a message to those who you don't know, who you didn't recognize, and just say, hey, thanks for joining me today.
Excellent tip. Yeah, I'm with you on the hashtags and the location tag. On the stories, what I do is, if I even use them once a day, I'm shocked. Okay, I don't use them every day, but what I'll do is maybe I'm going to do I record things for Instagram stories. I record things in my camera app, and that way I can record a 2 or 3 minute video without interruption. And having to, record them all in 15-second intervals and type in things and do whatever I want to do to them. I type them, I record it in a 3 minute, and then I use an app called Cut Story that chops it up into 15-second segments that I simply upload into Instagram stories. And that way it's seamless, right? And I'm not
real quick question. How is Cut Story do on the audio transition in those?
Pretty fabulous. I have no complaints.
Nice.
So cool. Then what I do is, and in response to your tagging and geofilter or geotagging on Instagram, what I'll do is the first segment, like yesterday I was in Los Angeles. I was in a town called the City of Hawthorne. It's up near LAX, and I was picking my wife up at LAX. And you could probably give me a financial education right now on buying lottery tickets, but I bought a lottery ticket at like the most winningest liquor store in the country, Bluebird Liquor. So I wanted to do a little story walking in talking about how dumb it is to buy a lottery ticket, but I'm going to do it anyway because the lottery got really big, and I'm going to do it at the most winningest store. So I wanted to tag the town. I don't think I used any hashtags. I only tagged the town, but I tagged the town in the very first 15-second segment, and then I don't tag the rest of the entire story. And what I try to do is whenever I create content, I try to tease it, whatever tell you what's coming in the first 15 seconds. So when it gets chopped, the tease is the one that has the tag or any hashtags to it, the geotag or the hashtags. And then the rest of them are free from that. Because one thing I've noticed, I don't know if you've noticed, if you geotag several segments of a story, a lot of the times the one that everyone finds is the last part of the story, not the one at the beginning. So I want people to know, if they find me from the geotag and they like the first segment because I've teased it right, they might come find my account to watch the rest of it, rather than catching it in the middle and wondering, what the hell is this guy talking about?
I like that method. I think if I could paint a metaphor for how I've approached social media, have you ever been at a party when someone walks in the door who's extremely loud and doesn't kind of read the room before he walks in? I have had that experience with social media, I feel like. And so I did a lot of too much tagging at the beginning. I wouldn't be surprised if some of my stuff was reported as spam, and that's what got me throttled. Like I would totally take the blame for whatever the reason is they decided to throttle me back. So I guess that's been the big part for me is I just need to make that official, formal outreach. And I'll tell you what, folks, if you do start to notice that you have any issues with Instagram, there's a couple of different ways to deal with it, but most of them you will not hear back from Instagram. So this is kind of what I'm doing is I've reported the problems. I've sent in the messages. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to create an organized effort where I write up another submit the report problem, and then I'm going to ask a whole bunch of people to retweet to Instagram about it so that hopefully they'll get their attention. They'll take a look at my account and possibly unblock some of my abilities. So,
good luck with that.
Yeah, right. It's a long process, and it's one of those things where time and attention, like that's gonna be worth my time and attention, but I also need to be aware of how I spend the rest of my time and attention during the week.
Sure. So you do a lot of Instagram Live. Do you do anything on Facebook or Periscope or anywhere else right now?
Not yet. So what I've been thinking is I'm going to do the Daily Dish on Facebook and possibly Periscope too, where I set up a multi-camera situation in the kitchen there and do it that way.
Dude, yeah. Just yesterday, or this weekend. Let me show you. I have to back up from the frame for a minute. This might be on the horizon for you. Something like this. You've heard of Archon mounts, right?
Yes. Yeah, I've heard the name. Oh, yeah.
Look at this beast. So this is for iPads, but you can get it for phones. You can get it for an iPad and a phone. But this thing, it arrived on Friday, and I put it together yesterday. And you could have this thing sitting on your countertop with everything pointed at you and the dishes, and you could be live on multiple platforms, including YouTube. So you're getting your YouTube content. And what's interesting is, and just to, when I was talking,
and I could have one of those devices recording for Anchor to put it right out to podcast.
That's what I'm saying.
I don't do the elaborate podcasting that you do. I just push mine out through Anchor so far. But I'm still learning.
This thing's a beast, and
it's a beast.
I really like it. It's obviously an ambitious project by Archon, and I think it's really cool. And I'm going to have a lot of fun with it. And I think that because you like to use mobile devices to live stream, and you want to at some point maybe go on multiple channels. I mean, they make one that only holds 2. They make one that holds just an iPad and a phone. I mean, you can configure it in any way that you can imagine configuring it.
Basically, my big thing, and clearing up, we could go for a walk if you want. We could chop this up. My favorite thing about all of this is I want to figure out a way to have as little tech and accessories as possible at all times. One of the things I really want to do is figure out a miking system so that everything is handheld. And basically right now I got my first tripod this year. We got one of these little Gorilla Pod things. And that has been really great for my phone and moving around. But for a lot of this, I don't even want to pull that out because the idea of handheld, I don't know. Have you experienced or checked out Musical.ly much yet as far as a platform goes?
No, I mean, I know people who use it. I mean, my friend Austin Uliano that dances around in a unicorn outfit.
I haven't talked to him in forever.
Yeah, he's had wild success with it, but it is a younger crowd. And they do respond to a grown man jumping around in a unicorn costume.
The reason I bring it up, and they also have a live stream with Lively, so that's connected with Musical.ly. The reason I bring that up is by going to Musical.ly, I learned the value of dynamic camera movement when it's done right so much from watching the kids there create. Because of what they're doing with transitions and just what I'm seeing with, how you've seen YouTube creators will be like, and then they'll zoom in and they'll be somewhere else. Well,
right.
I'm talking about where they're taking the cameras and they're moving them around and bringing you to other places, and it feels seamless. And so it's kind of stuff like that that's really inspired me to try to get away from the desktop, because I really think it's important for us to recognize that we're very soon going to be throwing tiny drones up in the air right next to us that are going to live stream on.
Sure. It's
So
crazy.
Why not go dynamic?
It's crazy where the tech is headed. So, Greg,
Sure.
what's in the near future for Greg Chats Cash, and where can people find? I mean, they can find you at Greg Chats Cash, but where else can they find you? Do you have a website going? I mean, feel free to share anything about what you've got coming and where they can find you and how to contact you.
Yeah, well, my big push right now is offline. I'm trying to do a lot of outreach locally. So if you're in the Northern California area, if you're in Ukiah, hit me up. I love chatting about money stuff, trying to support people and wherever they're at, trying to build their next wealth health, trying to build themselves towards something they want to be doing, whether it's figuring out ways to deal with debt or earn more money, figuring out the beginnings of investing or starting a business or really anything, even insurance. These types of money subjects that are hard to talk about, I make silly short videos, and then when you're comfortable, you can ask questions. That's what it comes down to. Check out Greg Chats Cash. I do a lot on Instagram. That's where I'm Instagramming live. I'm also creating stories. I spend a lot of time repurposing my stories up there on Instagram. And so you'll find a lot there, as well as some posts, but also I spend a lot of time these days on Twitter more and more. And I've been trying to get into LinkedIn at Greg Gates Jr. Because I look at that platform as another place to start reaching out to people. Here in the community, I want to do a lot of personal workshops. So one of the parts of my live streams, I hope in the coming weeks, will be presenting some of those. So trying to provide as much value as possible with responsible, often free financial education.
Dude, awesome. I love what you I love what I mean, you've been on my show like various shows, I guess, 4 or 5 times. That. I love what you're doing. I'm not always with you when you're live, but I've come on the Daily Dish a couple times, and I love to see you doing your thing and having fun. I mean, look, when I think of people out there who are using platforms like Snapchat and Instagram, and it's obvious they're having fun and they're really enjoying what they're doing and they're passionate about it. And it doesn't come across as a job because they really are loving it. You are on the top of my list of people who I feel is like that. I mean, it just, with every breath when you're live with your people, I mean, it's just genuine fun. You're providing a lot of value, and I think it's going to go a long way for you in helping other people in the long run. And that's what you want to do, right? You want to help other people, and you're doing it. And I love what you're doing. And of course, you'll be a guest on my show many more times to come in the years to come.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Hey, one other thing I would say about Instagram, folks, is don't sleep on the highlights. That's where I'm storing a lot of my stories. Todd has done it well with his layout. I'm going a little more haphazard, but that's also where I store a lot of my Instagram stories. That's one of the things. I'm a vertical video maker, and so finding a spot to store those is always tricky. So if you're into vertical video, look at highlights as a spot to really stash your stuff as a kind of a video resume. Well,
you're right. And I was at Social Media Marketing World a couple of weeks ago, and all the Instagram experts pretty much said the same thing, that highlights are the best real estate on all of Instagram to store your best stuff. If you have any messages, if you're trying to sell something, if you want people to sign up for an email list, if you want people to get to know you, you put that content in your highlights. I don't know that the public out there has quite grasped how the highlights can help them. Like if I go to some random page, I know to look at someone's highlights, but I think there's a lot of people out there that just don't really look at the highlights yet. But I think
because it's not in your feed, right? Like, so maybe if they start dabbling highlights into the feed, it'll be. So that's why I would say is like, get strong on highlights, because one day they might change the algorithm and start throwing the highlights into the feed of your followers. And then they can be like, oh, let's look at this highlight.
Well, and even better yet, I just thought of something that I've never thought of, and I'm going to talk about it in my Grammar School podcast. You mentioned earlier, when people participate in your live videos, to make sure to go and thank them in a private message afterwards, say hi to them, ask them how their day is, whatever, just acknowledging that they were there, they participated, whatever. You could do the same.
And use their name so they know it's not cut and paste.
Yeah, exactly. You could do the same with highlights. So a lot of the highlights, when I go in and look at who's viewed my highlights, most of those people are people that I know already. And I don't, I don't like, if I saw that you watch my highlights, I wouldn't feel like I needed to reach out to you and say, thanks, Greg, for watching my highlights. Cause you and I already have a relationship, but I could look at somebody I've never seen before. And that would be somebody to say, hey, I noticed you watched my highlights. If you have any questions, I just wanted to say, hi, thanks for looking at cause they looked at your bio if they looked at your highlight reel.
And the quicker that you can put your humanity behind your message, the better. The more they can see you as a real person and not just some random account, the better.
Exactly. So great tips to close it out, Greg. I like that we kind of collabed on a few good tips here. So anyway, listen, thanks a bunch for being on the show. Folks on the podcast, as you know, I record my interviews in a live video format for Entrepreneur Live Video. I record them we go live on Facebook, YouTube, and Periscope. We go live on Tuesdays, and then the podcast drops, and I usually work ahead. So this podcast you may actually be listening to it 3 or 4, maybe 5 weeks after I've recorded it. So if you want to hear them when they're happening, you could follow me on, my preference is YouTube, but Facebook, YouTube, or Periscope, and you can join in on Tuesdays when we do them. But it's been great having Greg here. Greg, thanks again, my friend. I love the background too.
You.
And you know what? I want to throw this in before I totally tune out on the podcast, folks. That well, and it doesn't really matter for them, but your signal sitting under those trees is the best signal, audio and video, I've ever had with you from when you've been at your house in
my
previous
home
times.
Network is junk.
Yeah, so I mean, your signal right there in that park. That
I'm scared to look at my data usage after this call.
You need to have them build you a sink and a kitchen counter there so you can do the daily dish, because it's just a gorgeous scene and it's giving you a signal like no other. I mean, it's just been an absolutely fabulous signal today.
Now you're giving me ideas on how to get my local department and hardware places to maybe renovate my home as sponsorship of my show.
Yeah, or you could have a portable. Maybe you could do a portable sink and counter somehow, and go set it up.
Do other people's dishes.
And you've got a pump. Maybe you can have somebody on the side pumping it, and it's coming out of a water jug. I don't know.
I'll tell you what. Before we go, I'll come in anytime. Anytime I'm down in SoCal, I'll come do dishes at your place sometime.
That sounds like a deal.
Yeah.
Deal. We're gonna do it. All right, Greg. Hey, thanks again, Greg. Let me tune out on the podcast. If anybody, we have had a very slow day on the live video. If anybody has a comment, feel free to leave it while we play some music. Thanks, folks, for listening. Take care.
Thanks so much for listening to Entrepreneur Live Video with Todd.LIVE. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit www.todd.live and on facebook.com/Todd.LIVE page. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time on Entrepreneur Live Video with Todd.LIVE.
You still live streaming in some spots?
Yeah, I am. And actually, so we're off the air on the podcast, but we're still on the air with the live video.
Excellent.
So no question. It's been a slow morning. I think that going live at 9 in the morning isn't a hot time.
Yeah, totally. That's actually one thing I meant to talk about is I've been moving my time around and I've been experimenting with that. And that's one of when I mentioned inconsistencies, that's one of the things. This is kind of like bonus footage. That's one of the things that I would say is play with different times of day, and be okay with being inconsistent when you're first getting started to figure out, because sometimes, you know what, it's like, yes, we need to do it daily at this time, but sometimes life doesn't let us do that.
Yeah. And for me, for doing the podcast and the live video version of the podcast, I really just had to pick like one day of the week where I let everyone choose from that day. And we either have an audience live or we don't have an audience live, because, if I try to make it every Wednesday at 9:00, then I'm only getting one interview a week. And I mean, it's just too hard. Like today I've got 3 interviews. I've got you, and then I've got Professor Nez on Instagram. And then I've got Jeff Fitzgerald on doing what we did today at noon. So it's a busy day, but it's just one of those things in creating content. Sometimes you're going to have an audience and sometimes you're not. Hey, Greg, I know that you're dealing with the data there, and I don't want to run you up. So listen, my friend, it was great having you on. You know where to find me. If I can ever do anything for you, I'm always around and willing to help in any way I can.
Yeah, I think I'd love to have you on the Daily Dish sometime. Do you ever have time around 5:30 in the evenings?
I do. We just
Cool.
it'll be hit or miss because that's the sports hours for the kids. But
Sure. Everything for me is digital recess. This is all digital recess. We just come and play. We make some sandboxes and sandcastles and knock them down.
there you go.
What I'd love to do is maybe sometime have you on, because that's typically when I'm doing it now is 5:30 p.m. just because that's a good time for East and West Coast after work, you know.
Well, pitch me some dates and we'll go from there.
Sounds great.
All right, Greg. Listen, thank you so much, Greg.
Thank you. Thank
And
you. Great
folks,
to see you, Todd.
folks out there in live video land, thank you too. Greg, take care. I'll
thanks
talk
for
to you
joining
soon.
us.
All right, take care,
Much
buddy.
appreciated. Take it easy.
Bye.